Welcome and welcome back to Alive to Thrive 21 Tools to Pursue Your Passions Fiercely and Confidently. I'm your host, Mihaela Dorina, and today I'm here with Tanya Penny. Tanya, welcome and thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, thank you, Mahila, for having us. For me and all the other speakers, and just everyone that's here listening, we're so happy you're here. So thank you.
Yeah, we're ready to do some thriving. But before we do that, let me tell you a little bit about Tanya. Tanya Penny is an OTR, intuitive guide, divine channel, and conduit, author of Connect with the Divine You book and journals. She teaches, empowers, and supports you to fully love and be your true self, heal your body and past trauma, and wake up to the powerful soul that you are using her mind, body, soul methodology. For 25 years, Tanya experienced anxiety, depression, pain, and had issues with weight and eating disorders. In 2004, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. That was her first wake-up call that there were some deeper issues in need of love, attention, and release that medications, lifestyle changes, and medical interventions couldn't touch. It wasn't easy. She had to peel back the layers and really look into herself, and it wasn't quick. It took years. But she completely healed. Tanya believes there is a place and time for Western medicine, but if you're 100% committed to healing all areas of your life, then it is time to connect with your soul as well. Now she teaches the therapeutic meditation process, also known as TMP, and the 10 Evolve Keys, trusting that they will find their way into the hearts and lives of those who need it and are ready to go deeper on their journey. Oh, I love so much hearing about people's stories, and you've had quite a lot to overcome, Tanya. And I feel like I usually start with the things that block us, hold us back, have us go around in circles. But with you, I wanna go straight into thriving, and I want to see if you can share with us how did you co-create the thriving life that you have today?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's not fast. It's not always a fast journey, right? But I just want to start with that. My life looks a lot different now than it did in my childhood and even into I'm going to say even into my late 30s. I believe that when we're on this journey, that we're always moving up to the or better. And it's always like, okay, so how much more can I receive now? So in my childhood, I had it pretty rough. I had an alcoholic father. I had a mother that was undiagnosed depression and I think bipolar. I was an only child, and my parents fought all the time. And my dad was violent, and there was also quite a bit of abuse, other abuse in our house, verbal, physical, sexual abuse. And so at that point in childhood, could I have ever imagined, right? I was totally in survival mode. And I saw my friends, I saw other people around me have lives that looked very different than mine. And, so at that point, did I think, oh, I deserved better? Probably not. That was just, it's kind of your normal, your baseline, if that's what you grow up with. But as I moved, I'm going to say as I moved into my late teens, something in me knew that I could get out of that. I could get out of that situation. And I always did well in school, so that really helped me. I got into a good college, I got scholarships, even though my parents financially couldn't help me. And so that was kind of I'm going to call that my first step up, right? Was getting to leave that, I'm going to call it just chaotic, negative environment, right? That as a child, I didn't think I'd ever be able to escape that. Right. So that was kind of my first step up, is getting to leave home and going to this good college. And, then I found myself in lots of abusive continuous abusive relationships, right? Because that was my normal, right? And you understand, right? A lot of us, right? We find ourselves in these relationships that mirror the ones we had with our parents, right? Until we become aware of it. So through my 20s, I had a lot of, I just had a lot of that, a lot of abusive relationships. Though I did well in school, I was able to get a job. So I upgraded in that area, right? Upgraded in terms of my career, my purpose. Moving into my 30s, I had gotten married. He seemed like a great guy. As soon as we got married, he was very controlling and very verbally abusive. And then I got MS. And, even though my life had upgraded to a big degree by that point, I believe that MS was that wake up call that I needed a very big upgrade, right? I had been making these kind of like baby step upgrades. Like
Yeah.
I deserve a little bit better. I deserve a little bit better. And then it was like the 2x4. So, some of you listening, your 2x4 may have also been an illness, or your 2x4 may be another life area breakdown, right? Death of a loved one, accident, divorce, right? There's lots of different possibilities for these, what I call these big, 2x4 soul knocking loudly at your door. So that's really, right? So that's really when I was like, okay. The MS that I had was really bad. It got bad really fast. I lost vision in my right eye. I couldn't talk at times. I couldn't find words. It was like I had a stroke on the right side of my body. Some days I couldn't barely walk or take a shower or any of that. And, that began my deeper journey, or my bigger upgrade, I want to call it, right? Really looking at, oh my God, I have totally I've been living in survival mode, given what I grew up in. And I realized, I don't have to live like that anymore. So that was really my big shift. And it, like I said, it wasn't fast. I was diagnosed in 2004. By 2010, the symptoms were gone. And I had gone through, with everything I had to do, there was a huge upgrade in my relationships. I had to let go of a lot of friendships. My family, of my biological family, I got divorced. I left my secure job and started my business. So within that 7 years, right, you can call sometimes illness, I think of as a cocoon. Like you really have to go inward and into that. Some people would call it selfish, but you really have to go into that womb, that cocoon. And if you really want that upgrade, that's oftentimes what it looks like. And it was a tough 7 years, 6-7 years. But what does my life look like today? Let's fast forward to that, right? So I get to do this for a living. I get to support other women, and I do support some men too, but mainly women, right? And healing their past wounds or traumas or whatever you want to call it. And I get to do that virtually. I also do some of that in person, right? So, I guess I also want to just put on a side note here for everyone that's listening that your biggest struggles are often going to be a huge clue to what your purpose is. Right? So grateful for all those things that I've been through, because they help me to help the clients that I see today. I currently live in Hawaii, which has been a dream. Came here for the first time in 2004. And at the time I was married, and my husband at that time I said, I want to move here. He said, that's not possible. And so that was kind of put to the back. And last year, I made that leap, and me and my current partner moved here. So it looks like getting to live where you want to live, right? That's part of thriving. Getting to live where you want to live, getting to share your gifts. getting to not worry about money. I know that's a big one for a lot of people. I'm going to say thriving also looks like having control over your schedule and not letting, we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started the recording, right? About not letting those parts of you that are in survival mode run your schedule and have it extremely full and always busy. So having some spaciousness, I think is really big. And a lot of women especially want that spaciousness and that freedom, time freedom. And so that to me is what thriving looks like too. Before we started recording, we were talking about, I was saying, thank you so much for being flexible, because we were supposed to do this like 2 times before this today. And, in the past, I would have let that part of me just push through. And I caught that part of me, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, and was able to say, you know what, your husband just had surgery Friday. You just moved. Right now we're staying at a resort till our new place is ready. But it's been crazy. So I gave myself permission to clear my schedule, except for this beautiful interview, which I pushed back a few days, with your support. So I think that time freedom is a big thriving piece too. Would you agree with that for yourself?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably your story, because I feel like, maybe someone who's watching really resonates with that, and if nothing else, they don't feel alone in what they're going through. I think that's a really important piece, to
Yeah,
feel like.
I think that's why we share our stories and why we're being called. I think that's another part of thriving is being vulnerable, and not being afraid to share your, what we might call our negative stuff, or our failings, or whatever you call them, because I don't believe there are any mistakes. But I think that's a bigger call now more than ever, is being able to be authentic and be vulnerable. And yeah, so absolutely, I love being. If you would have talked to me 10 years ago, would I have been this vulnerable? No, that has also taken practice. And that's one of my deepest, biggest goals for myself, is to continue to be more vulnerable. So yeah, and then of course I want to just add too, Mihaela, that part of thriving is your health.
Yeah.
Having that healthy mind and body, and we know that the two are connected, obviously.
Yeah.
Talk about which we're gonna move into talking about, but that for me today, and the last piece is having that loving support. I used to have a ton of friends, and they weren't all very supportive though. So what I've realized as I've moved through this, this journey of illness and these other breakdowns, is you get to see who's really there for you, right? And so it's not so much about quantity, it's about quality now in my relationships. And I have a partnership now that I honestly never thought was possible. I felt so broken and so not good enough, given my past experiences, tons of sexual abuse and verbal abuse in my past, that I just thought no one is ever going to really accept me for me. And so I'm here to say it is possible, you guys. Like, I didn't think it was, and it is. Right, this man I'm with now, there's nothing I can do that I don't think, we've been together for a couple of years now, and he hasn't criticized me once, like, ever. And that's like, what, really?
It's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love also how you actually described the survival patterns, and how they can show up. Sometimes it's really hard to catch, to recognize them as like, oh, this is what I'm doing. It's happening.
Yeah. And so would this be a good time to get into what those survival patterns are?
Yes, let's dive right in.
Yeah, you might be wondering, I didn't want to name them yet, but yeah, so on this journey that I've been on, I've seen for myself and then in working with my clients, these three big, what I call survival patterns that keep us from moving into thriving. And so the first pattern, which I've alluded to, is that perfectionist, right? That part of you, and perfectionists can be sneaky. People say, "Oh, I'm not a perfectionist. My house doesn't have to be perfect or it doesn't have to be perfectly cleaned." It's not just about that, right? So it can look different for different people, but ultimately it's that part of you that is very hard on you. That inner critic is what I call the perfectionist. The part that it's like you never do anything good enough, whether it's a mother, a coach, like fill in the blank, right? A wife, like you're never doing anything good enough. Those expectations are so damn high, right? And then when you don't meet those high expectations, then you beat yourself up, right? So the perfectionist really is about that negative self-talk, that inner critic, also the part of you that, it's so interesting. Perfection can look different for different people. For some people, it's like overdoing. Like, for an example, like I would write a paper in college 5 times before I would turn it in. I would physically have to write it out. This is when typewriters were just like the electronic, yeah, were just coming out like in 1993. And but I would write it 5 times before I would even go type it up.
Mm.
Like the over crazy, right? Like the house has to be immaculate. And then it can also look like paralysis. So I have a lot of clients who are amazing coaches and healers and leaders, and they're not rising to their next level because they are afraid of making a mistake. They're afraid of failing. They're afraid
That's
of being rejected and criticized because, again, I'm speaking for myself, but almost everyone on the planet grew up probably with at least one critical parent or sibling or teacher, right? And so that's where that comes from, right? That's where this like perfectionist part of us comes from. And it's, ultimately, again, all these patterns are trying to help us survive, right? So we don't want to get mad at these parts of us either, because that actually doesn't help. And of course, we'll get into that later, what we need to do. But the worst thing you can do is reject your perfectionist, right? So even as we're talking about perfection right now, you guys, and you're probably like, "Oh my God, this is one of my patterns." The truth is most of us have all three. But, I recommend like have compassion and curiosity. Like, is this one that's really keeping you from thriving? And just say yes, yeah, yes or no. You might even rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. That's the OT in me. That does that, so that we can see. Again, we don't use numbers to beat ourselves up. We use them to see where we are now and where we are, let's say in a month, 2 months, 3 months. So it takes time to shift these patterns that are so deep. Like they're at the core of our thinking. We've got to do this to survive. And the perfectionist is a big one, I think. Do you relate to that at all? Is that something you?
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've lived most of my life with so much fear. I yeah, and it's fear of everything, of failing, of being rejected, like you said earlier, of succeeding too,
Oh
and
yeah,
then losing it all.
yeah, absolutely. Depending on, again, what we experienced in childhood. All these patterns are driven by fear. Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought up fear, because
Yeah.
really that's what all these patterns are driven by is fear. So yeah, just take a note where you are right now with this one. When I started this journey with MS, I would say that I was at a 10 out of 10, maybe even a 12 out of 10 with my inner critic. I really was hard on myself, like a lot of self-hatred, really negative self-talk. Yeah, and a lot of fear of failure. A lot of fear of failure. But yeah, so just take a note where you are today. And then of course we're going to be getting into how to move through it. But the first step of moving through anything is, as we know, is just the awareness of it. Right? The awareness and the acceptance of it, that it's there. So perfection is number one. Ready to move into number two?
Yep, let's go.
Number two is the people pleaser.
Mm.
Again, what person on this planet as a child, right? So these patterns almost always start in childhood, right? Like my perfectionist started in childhood so that it would keep me out of violence, out of, you know, I tried to do
Trouble.
things. Yeah, it was like, I better do things perfectly, whatever perfect meant to my father, or, you know, bad stuff was going to come my way. So of course. And same thing with people pleasing, right? Like as a child, we want to please mom and dad or our siblings in order to get love, in order to get acceptance. And oh gosh, I'm just thinking of like middle school, right? Like then it comes in school too. Like it's, oh, I better do what my peers like so that I'm not criticized or teased or embarrassed, right? Humiliated. So I would say this people pleasing. So in a nutshell, it's doing something that you really don't want to do in order to make somebody else happy or in order to avoid conflict. So I really, when I first started my business, and I still have to catch myself when I have a new client, I will, and this happens, you guys, anytime we do something new, we're more likely to fall back in, even if we've worked on these patterns a lot. Right? So case in point, I got a new client recently, and I could tell that I might, you know, I was like, oh, I think I might be, I need to be careful not to fall back into that, because I live in a very, sometimes a very challenging time zone. You know, I work with people all over, so Japan and London, and sometimes we're like 12 hours apart. So I have to be, you know, flexible, yet I have to make sure I'm not doing a time that really doesn't work in my schedule, for example. And you might you might experience that as well. But again, oh, and the other one, which is huge for me, that I still have to work on to this day, is with men, people pleasing with men. And I don't know why I never really struggled with that with women, except in my business, right? Because that was money related, wanting to please, so I didn't like lose a client or make a client mad in terms of money. But with men, like with my partners, that was a really big one, and still can be for me sometimes. So, you know, again, we might do this with some people, or we might do this with everybody, right?
Yeah, that makes me think of one of my patterns, because I grew up in Romania under communism, and you know, everything was repressed, and people were not trusting each other. So and also you didn't question authorities. So for me, that's a big, like, awareness has to, you know, I'm working on that.
Yeah, people pleasing with authority, absolutely. And, you know, as a child, our parents were the primary authority, and then that moves outside, like you said, to your country, to some of you, it might be at work, right? The authority at work, you might fall into people pleasing. You don't want to say no when your boss asks you to do like another project. It can also be religion, right? So religion is also seen as authority. And that's been a big one. You know, I grew up Catholic, and it was the Catholic that I grew up with was very negative, punishing, like, you know what I'm saying, right? So I've had to work through that, you know, as well. And so we all have these kind of different past experiences that have caused us to fall into this, and why it's so I'm going to say why it's so stressful. I mean, all these patterns create stress, but people pleasing, it's like there's no way you can please everyone in your life and also please yourself. There really is no way. to always 100%, right? So sometimes I am going to say things to my sweetie that I need something that maybe he can't give, or that he, doesn't like that I'm saying, right? But we have to do it to honor ourselves. So, we want to also look at this as we don't want to abandon ourselves. And when we fall into people pleasing, any of these actually, we're abandoning ourselves and our inner children. So yeah, so people pleasing. So just take note if people pleasing is something you struggle with, and then in what area of your life, right? Like I mentioned that I'm pretty good at work. When I get a new client, I can waver a little bit, but yeah, I have to keep an eye on it still with my sweetie. Absolutely. Absolutely. So just again, awareness and acceptance of where you are right now in terms of people pleasing, and how is this keeping you? That's another question I like to ask. So where are you doing it still? And then how is it negatively impacting you? Because we're human, right? And oftentimes pain has to get bad enough, right? That we're able to then move through that, right? Move through that pattern and to the other side of it. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and so should we move into the third one?
Number 3, yes.
3, pretending to be superhuman. So I cheated a little bit calling it the 3 Ps, but pretending to be superhuman. So Superman or Superwoman. I work a lot with women, so we talk a lot about the Superwoman. And of all of them, I'm going to say this one has the most facets to it. And let's see, where do I want to go with this one to start? So the different facets of the Superwoman. One is that you think you have to do everything alone, and
relate to that.
Don't want to ask for help. Or maybe you ask and then you're like, oh, no, I really don't need it, right? And then it's offered to you and you push it away. And this is big in I've had to work through this a lot in my business. My perfectionist would say, nobody can do it as good as me. And so therefore I have to do it all. That's the Superwoman. And I had a VA, and then she left, and then I was like, oh, I can just do it all by myself. And for a couple of years, I did, not very successfully. And so, yeah, just asking for help, receiving help, whether it's from your partner, your kids, your friends, at work. Yeah, I would say this is a big one that most women struggle with. Right? It's weak to ask for help, or like nobody can do it as good as I can. So I'm just going to do it. I think that's a big facet, I think another facet of the Superwoman is the thinking it's all up to you to fix or save people, whether it's your sweetie, whether it's your children, whether it's your clients, right? Ultimately, everybody has to do their part. But our Superwoman, and I can tell you where mine comes from, absolutely. Number one, I felt like I raised myself, right? So I felt like in order to get my needs met, I had to pretty much do everything.
Yeah.
Some of you might relate to that.
You had to step up. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to step up. Dad's drunk and on drugs, and mom is, depressed and in bed. It's like, guess I'm going to make myself dinner. So it's like many of us had that. And I also have a lot of clients. I'm an only child, so I didn't have this, but I have a lot of either the oldest or middle, and had to take care of their younger siblings, right? Like it was all on them. So this happens starting in childhood, right? And then my mom, I tried to fix her and save her so that she could take care of me, right? I'm so good at coaching now because I was my mother's counselor since the age of 5, right? Like, yeah. So thinking you have to fix or save everyone, like the world is on your shoulders. That is a really big facet.
That's heavy.
Yeah. And then we've got the third facet, that is the part of you, it's the superwoman, all of these are, but I've got to do more. I've got to achieve more. So you're just never happy with your success, right? It's like you hit one goal, you got to go to the next goal. There's not even like time to enjoy it. And this really ties in with the never good enough too, right? The perfectionist, right? So it's like, I need another, before I can go out and help other people, I need another certification.
Yeah, another degree. Yep.
Yep, another certification, another degree. I need more practice. So many of my clients, again, are amazing coaches and healers, or meant to be. And I have to be like, you know what? You get started now. Like, you just have to be a couple steps ahead of somebody else to help them. Right? Like, I'm never probably going to have all my stuff healed, or I'm never going to have all my shit together. Like, we're human. Does that mean I can't help other people? Does it mean you can't help people? No.
Exactly. Well, like one of the people that I worked with in my healing journey, she's a Dharma teacher, and what she says is a second grader can teach a first grader math because they've learned it, they know. So
Yep, absolutely. I love that. That is such a simple and powerful metaphor. Like, I really like example. Like, I love that. Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that, and to go along with it, it's like we think we have to prove ourselves. Like, it's like the more we do, and we know
yeah,
this
we
is a
prove our value.
Yeah, I mean, this is a cultural thing for many of us, right? The amount that we do equals our worth.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another big piece of the superwoman. She just wants to do more and more and more, to prove her worth, to prove that she's, worthy of thriving, whatever it is, the money, the fill in the blank, right? The relationship, etc. So, ladies, let's take a note of that. And if there's any men listening to this perhaps as well, like, what parts of you with the superwoman, really resonate with you? And again, acceptance, awareness and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And some people say, well, is it important to look back at where these patterns come from? I say, yeah, we look back, but we don't stare. Like, we don't want to get caught up in our story of, right, of the past, but yet it is helpful. And I'll tell you why it's helpful. Because in order to begin to heal or shift these patterns, we have to know what these parts of us, why they created, right? Why they took on these roles, right? So that is why it is important to spend a little bit of time on acknowledging, where did these patterns come from for me, right? Yes, I have this pattern. This is what it looks like in my life right now. This is how it's holding me back. That's why I want to change it, right? So that's useful to know, like, why I want to change it. And then, where did it come from, so that I know how to soothe it? So I used to say release the 3 Ps, and I still say that because that's what the program and everything I teach is called. But ultimately, how do we stop? Right? How do we get out of these patterns? And one of my biggest tools that I want to share with you guys today is we have to learn to soothe these parts of us. We talked about fear in the beginning, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, recent example this morning, anytime I do an interview, and I do interviews all the time, but anytime I do them, my perfectionist is afraid that I'm not going to do it good enough, and that I'm going to be rejected, or you're going to say it's crap, or whatever, right? So I have to soothe her, right? And soothe her. And so you want to ask yourself, and this is why it's good to know why this part of you was created. What does he or she need to hear from you?
Mm-hmm.
Stepping in as what I call the divine parent to these parts of us that are thinking we need to be in these patterns to survive. And we need to hear them. We need to give them compassion and acceptance and understanding, just like an unconditionally loving parent would. And then after we do that, we get to soothe them with what's true now. Right. So, for example, for me now, what I would say to this, what I said to part of me this morning is, you know what? Everyone's probably not going to like what I shared today, and that's okay. Everyone, and that's true for everyone here. Like, we're not here to be liked by everyone. We're here for our people, right? You're here for your people. I'm here for my people. And so it's okay if everyone doesn't like us and doesn't like what we share. Doesn't mean it's not good enough, right? So that's one of the things that I soothe mine with. And ultimately, bad things happened at my house growing up, but what really bad thing could happen to me right now? Right? Is someone going to come knocking at my door and like hit me or yell at me that listened to this interview and didn't like it? Probably not. I mean, realistically.
Well, but sometimes that's how we check that we're safe right now. This is not about right now. It's about back then.
Absolutely. It was about back then. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's reminding those parts of us now that, you know what, that was true in the past, but it's not true anymore. Right? A lot of these things, unless of course if you're listening, you are in an abusive relationship, then that's not what I'm talking about. Right? That's completely different. But for many of us, that's not what's happening right now. Right?
Yeah.
Not what's happening. So yeah.
Oh, I so love everything that you're sharing. I feel like I could do a whole summit on just those darn patterns.
We all
But
have them, right? So
yes, we do.
but
They
I
show
know,
up.
yes, I know and it takes time. So I just want to share that as well. I know that we're at the end and it does take time. As I said, I've been working with these patterns deeply since 2008.
Mhm.
And teaching others, and I still have to check them, still have to do the soothing, still have to catch it. So yeah, should I share about my gift?
Yeah, before we say goodbye, why don't you do that?
Yeah, so would love to go into this more with those of you that are interested. So I have the Release the 3 Ps gift, and it includes a video lesson, an audio lesson, one of my most powerful tools, the guided therapeutic meditation practice that helps to shift these fears and limiting beliefs that keep us stuck in these survival patterns that we were talking about today. And also one of my newer tools called the self-healing process. And that's really where I'm guiding you to step in as the divine parent and soothe whichever P that you're working with, right? The perfectionist, people pleaser, tend to be superhuman. So those really are what helps us to move. These tools help us to move out of these patterns, so that we can go into thriving and really receive. I would say give and receive more love in all forms, which is what we're all here to do, and share our gifts. So, in a nutshell, that's my gift for you guys.
Oh, Tanya, thank you so much for sharing your story, your wisdom, your experience, and your tools too. Those are really, really good resources. And yeah, everyone, don't forget to grab your 3 Ps. And we'll see you in the next interview.
Thank you
Bye,
so much.
everyone.
Bye.